I've got to confess to you people that I've been negligent about reading a book that was given to me about 5 years ago. The thing that struck me so forcefully about this guy just coming through this book, they talk about Celoron was a village on Chautauqua Lake about 3 miles west of Jamestown in southwestern New York, whose sole claim to attention was a big amusement park. I remember that very well.
I started it just because I enjoyed baseball, and it was a facet of baseball that had never been covered. That's how I got into it. But the more I got into it, the more I began to believe that Negro baseball was an important historical artifact, not just of black history, but of American history. It reflected the times, the segregated times that during which it lived. The 20s, 30s, 40s was a segregated era, and while I don't know that Jamestown was terribly much affected, Warren certainly was not. We rarely saw black people unless a black baseball team came in. So the more I got into it, the deeper I got into it, the more I thought it was significant beyond sports, that it was an important part of black identity in this country. Next to the black church, I think black baseball was probably the most solid institution there was in black communities. I saw I saw a lot of the barnstorming black teams. The Homestead Grays came into Warren at least every other year. The Philadelphia Stars, the Baltimore Eli Giants came in quite regularly. They'd play either the local semi-pros or they'd have an exhibition game between two black teams in Warren, which had no black people.
The last paragraph of the preface of your book, quote, "One summer day in 1939, a kid squatted on the bank behind home plate at Russell Field in Warren, Pennsylvania, fielding foul balls, which could be redeemed for a nickel each, no small consideration those days, but saw Jock Gibson hit the longest home run ever struck in Warren County. It was one of the most impressive feats performed by touring black players that excited the wonder and admiration of that foul ball shagger. This book is the belated fruit of his wonder." Signed, Robert Peterson. Tell us about that.
Remember, Warren had in those days, Tom wouldn't even know it, but the field was where Sylvania is now, down over a bank. And there was a football field there for the high school, and then the home plate was near the bottom of the hill. And they would put up a canvas fence around the outfield to make a fence. And all I can recall is that Gibson hit the longest one I ever saw. And I said, without any attempt at checking anything, I said it was the longest one ever hit in Warren County.
Who's gonna?
I don't know. So far, nobody has attacked me on it. The fact that Jamestown appeared to be very accepting was clear to me from the standpoint that they never mentioned that, his name? Kelly was black. He was in the box scores. I'd never even seen, you had a picture of the team later on. I never saw that when I was researching, but he was never mentioned as a black man in the Jamestown paper that I ever saw. He was mentioned as black in Sporting Life, which is how I knew that he was here and that he played for the Jamestown team.
That is, for our purposes, and a little-known fact that only you really brought to light. We've had some fun trying to dig up all the old box scores. And
fellows may not know this, but Greg wrote a piece for one of the the Society for American Baseball Research publications about the Celoron Acme Giants. It's probably the most complete. In 1896, the Supreme Court gave a decision called Plessy versus Ferguson, which gave states the right to segregate black people in accommodations in hotels and railroads. The case was actually about a railroad guy putting a guy out of a white car in a railroad, but it was applied then to schools and hotels and parks and swimming pools, everything. That was continuing throughout the early part of the century, and it was blatant is the wrong word. It was absolutely intolerable, the lengths to which it went.
Put me into perspective. When was it that they start the organized black leagues?
1920 was the first successful one. There had been some experiments before that, but that was the first successful one. It was the Negro National League. It was started in Chicago with about 8 Midwestern teams.
And then prior to that time, there was just basically barnstorming teams?
Oh, yes, yeah. There was a league in 1910, but it didn't thrive. There was a league in the South even earlier than that, but it didn't thrive either. They were mainly barnstormers. They played college teams and semi-pros and pros. In those days, it wasn't a disgrace to play a black team. So that some of the major league teams played them in the 1800s and in the early 1900s. I went first to Roy Campanella because I knew he had a liquor store in Harlem. He wasn't very helpful, but he did tell me that Buck Leonard was down in Rocky Mount, and he told me that Judy Johnson was a scout for the Phillies. So I had a starting point there. So I went to them and interviewed them, and Leonard told me where Cool Papa Bill was, and Johnson had an address for Bill Yancey, and that was the way I operated. I did find a club in Chicago called the Old Ball Players Club of Chicago that put me on to about 6 or 7 old players and a couple of widows in Chicago. So I was able to make a trip out there. I went to Kansas City expressly to visit Paige. I had arranged in advance for it. I go up and I knock on the door. His daughter says, "Oh, he's not here. He won't be here for a couple of days." Paige was notoriously indifferent to schedules, not very considerate. So I spent, I don't know, a couple $100 going to Kansas City for nothing. It was the most disappointing part of my business. I did meet him later on when he was inducted in the Hall of Fame.
Sounds that these guys were bigger than life.
Oh, Paige, obviously.
Yeah.
I don't know, Gibson didn't have the color, I'll put that in quotes. He wasn't colorful in the sense that Paige was, and so I don't think he was ever appreciated nearly as much as Paige. Almost universally, of course, Gibson died by the time Robinson got to the majors, but they were supportive, but they really didn't think much of Robinson as a ball player, believe it or not. They said he was not the best player in the Negro Leagues by far. In fact, most of them thought Monty Irvin was better, as well as some others. But they all were very supportive of him, and they all, of course, laud him now highly for the abuse he took and how he stood up to it and what he went through to achieve what he did. John Newman, 1 or 2 years. Okay, so I spanned the period from probably 41 through about 48 when basically I left the area and I didn't come back. But those were players that I remember in those years. And Jamestown, as I remember, had pretty good teams in those years. The most egregious error in the book is the spelling of Celoron. I'm sure you've noticed that.
Notice it.
I don't know how.
But you're not alone.
Could the Evening Journal have spelled it wrong back in the 80s?
Actually, well.
I don't remember. I'm not usually that careless. Speaking of that, you'll be interested in this, I think. If you ever looked at that book really critically, you will think, gee, that ends rather suddenly. As soon as I've got Jackie Robinson playing in the majors, I use about 2 pages to kiss it off. The rest of the years, and the reason was I needed the last $750 of the advance, which I couldn't get until I finished the book to pay my bills. So that's why it ends rather suddenly. Oh, and it's also, I want you to know, I'm with the Harvard Classics. There is a leather-bound edition.
Congratulations!
Easton Press, which is a little outfit in Connecticut that publishes leather-bound books, decided to do a baseball series. So they did Summer of '49 and Glory of Their Times and a Yogi Berra biography, and I don't know what all. About 20 of them, including me. So I'm in leather covers.
Bob Peterson's book and the launching of an era of understanding of that baseball time period, which included the Josh Gibsons, the Satchel Paiges.
All of us, let me say thank you very much for taking
My pleasure.
precious time out of your schedule.
I don't have. Thank you. You guys have to go back to work. I don't.